Most video games give you a gun and call you a hero. Manhunt gave you a plastic bag and called you a star. In 2003, Rockstar North made a game that didn't just push the limits of violence in gaming. It pointed a camera directly at the player and asked one deeply uncomfortable question. If you're watching someone get executed on a screen for entertainment, what exactly does that make you? This is the story of Manhunt, the game that made its own developers sick, the game that got blamed for a real murder, and the game that turned every person who played it into the puppet of a madman without them even realizing it. Before we talk about what Manhunt does to your mind, you need to understand the world it drops you into. The game is set in Carcer City, a fictional Rust Belt metropolis that feels less like a place and more like a punishment. Heavily inspired by real cities like Detroit, Gary, Indiana, and Chicago at their worst, Carcer City is broken, polluted, and completely abandoned by anything resembling justice. The police department is entirely corrupt, bought and paid for. The streets are carved up by violent gangs. The whole city feels like it has already given up on itself. Carcer City is also officially part of the Grand Theft Auto universe, specifically the 3D era. In GTA 3, radio dialogue and ads reference it as a neighboring city overrun with crime. Rockstar brands like Sprunk Soda and 24/7 stores appear on Carcer City billboards and in the trash on the streets. It was never a place you wanted to visit. Manhunt made you live there. The man you play as is James Earl Cash, and the game tells you almost nothing about him, which is deliberate. What we know is this: Cash spent roughly a decade evading the law before finally being caught in 2000 and locked up in Darkwoods Penitentiary. He was sentenced to death. By 2003, his execution date arrived. The game never tells you exactly what he did. There is no backstory cutscene, no explanation of his crimes. All the game confirms is that he was already a proficient and experienced killer long before any of this started. His name itself is a dark joke from Rockstar, named after James Earl Ray, the man who assassinated Martin Luther King Jr. Cash isn't a hero. He isn't framed as one. He's a death row inmate who happens to be very good at surviving. That distinction matters more than anything else in this game. He was voiced by Stephen Wilfong in what remains his only known acting credit. Now, here is where things get genuinely disturbing. Lionel Starkweather, known throughout the game simply as the director. He is a middle-aged, overweight, deeply corrupted former film director who once had a successful career in Vinewood, Rockstar's version of Hollywood. His films flopped, his fame dried up, and rather than accept that, something inside him broke completely. He relocated to Carcer City, and he found a new kind of filmmaking. Starkweather runs an underground operation called Valiant Video Enterprises, a snuff film network. For those who don't know what a snuff film is, it's exactly as bad as it sounds. A film that captures a real, actual murder, produced and distributed for money or entertainment to underground buyers. For decades, it was considered an urban legend. The FBI investigated rumors of snuff rings in the 1970s and 80s and found nothing concrete. But with the rise of the internet and the dark web, real cases began to surface. What Starkweather does in Manhunt was fiction in 2003. It isn't entirely fiction anymore. Starkweather controls Carcer City by bribing its gangs and paying off corrupt police chief Gary Schaffer. He is never anywhere near the violence he orchestrates. He sits safely in his control room surrounded by CCTV monitors, watching everything through cameras, directing his stars through earpieces. He is voiced by Brian Cox, who plays him with a specific kind of gleeful, aristocratic sickness that makes every line he delivers feel genuinely wrong. He is a coward who has built an empire specifically so he never has to get his hands dirty. Remember that. It matters later. The game opens with a news broadcast. A female journalist confirms on air that the execution of James Earl Cash has been carried out at Darkwoods Penitentiary. Lethal injection administered. Cash pronounced dead. Except he wasn't. Starkweather bribed the prison officials to sedate Cash instead of killing him. Cash wakes up in an abandoned building in Carcer City with an earpiece in his ear and Starkweather's voice filling his head. The deal is simple, and there is no negotiating it. Perform, kill, entertain the director, do it well enough, and maybe you walk away from this alive. From that moment the game begins, and it never lets you feel safe for a single second. The story spans 20 missions across the rotting bones of Carcer City. Cash has to fight his way through a series of violent gangs Starkweather has paid to hunt him down, each one more depraved than the last. The Hoods. the skins, the war dogs, the innocents, the smileys, and Starkweather's own private military force, the Cerberus. Each gang believes they're the predator. None of them know that Cash is being guided, protected, and coached from above by the very man who hired them. And then there is Piggsy. If you played Manhunt, you already know this name. If you didn't, nothing can fully prepare you for this character. Piggsy was Starkweather's original star. Before Cash, Piggsy was the main attraction of Valiant Video Enterprises. He was thrown into enclosures with people and filmed doing what he did naturally. But over years of total isolation and brutality, Piggsy lost whatever remained of his mind. He developed a taste for human flesh. He became completely uncontrollable. So Starkweather did what cowards do. He had the Cerberus chain Piggsy in the attic of his mansion and kept him there, feeding him bodies of failed contestants and pretending the problem didn't exist. When Cash finally breaks into the mansion, a panicked Starkweather releases Piggsy, hoping he'll solve the problem for him. Piggsy is obese, completely naked, wears the severed, decaying head of a real pig over his face, and carries a running chainsaw. He communicates in grunts and squeals and fragments of broken childlike phrases. One hit from his chainsaw kills Cash instantly, and for the first time in the entire game, Cash is not the predator. He is the prey. You spend the Piggsy encounter in a dark attic, using glass shards and bricks to lure him into traps, staying completely silent, terrified of every footstep. It is one of the most genuinely unsettling sequences in gaming history, not because of its gore, but because of how completely it reverses the power dynamic you spent 20 missions building. Cash eventually lures Piggsy onto a weak section of flooring above a stairwell. Piggsy falls and catches himself on the edge. Cash uses Piggsy's own chainsaw to sever his hands. The monster drops. After that, Cash finds Starkweather and uses the same chainsaw. The coward who directed everything from behind screens and cameras, who never once touched the violence he built his empire on, meets the same end as everyone else in Carcer City. The journalist we saw at the opening broadcasts everything. She exposes Starkweather's entire operation, Valiant Video Enterprises, the corrupt police department, Police Chief Schaffer's involvement. Schaffer is arrested. The network is dismantled. Cash walks away. He disappears. As far as the world knows, he died in that execution chamber 3 years ago, and that's exactly how he wants it. Now, here is where Manhunt becomes something more than just a dark story. The game is a third-person stealth survival experience. Cash is almost always outnumbered, outgunned, and one mistake away from death. To survive, you have to master 3 things: shadows, sound, the radar. Step into darkness, and Cash becomes invisible. Tap a bottle or a brick against a wall to pull a hunter away from his group. Track enemy footsteps through walls by listening to the sounds they make. Every movement is deliberate. Every decision costs something. But the execution system is where Manhunt becomes genuinely unlike anything else that existed at the time. When you get behind an enemy undetected, a targeting reticle appears over their head. Press the button immediately, and you get a quick, clean kill. But if you hold the button and wait, the reticle changes color as it charges through 3 tiers. White, fast and functional. Starkweather is underwhelmed. Yellow. You hold your position for several more agonizing seconds. The kill becomes more drawn out. The camera angle tightens. The VHS static gets heavier. Starkweather sounds more interested. Red. You stand inches from an enemy who has no idea you're there, completely exposed, for as long as possible. What follows is some of the most deliberately disturbing animation ever put into a video game. The camera goes frantic. The audio of the victim becomes overwhelming, and Starkweather completely loses control of himself in your ear. Here is the part that matters. The game actively punishes restraint. If you play efficiently and use only quick kills, Starkweather mocks you at the end of the level. Your rating drops. You miss bonus content. To get the best outcome, the game forces you to take the most dangerous risks specifically so the deaths can be as prolonged and brutal as possible. Rockstar built a meter that measures your own cruelty and rewards you for maximizing it. This is where Manhunt stops being a conversation about video games and becomes a conversation about the person holding the controller. In almost every other game, violence is justified. You are a hero. The enemies are monsters, or soldiers or threats. The killing serves a purpose within a moral framework the game provides for you. Manhunt strips all of that away. Cash is not a hero. You are not doing anything noble. You are executing people in cold blood, in increasingly brutal ways, for the entertainment of a deeply disturbed man who is watching through cameras and grading your performance. And then the game shows you something you cannot unsee. Starkweather watches the kills through a screen. You watch the kills through a screen. Starkweather pays for the violence. You paid for the video game. He sits in a controlled environment rating the executions. You sit on your couch rating the executions. The game holds a mirror up to the player and makes it impossible to look away from what you see. The consumer of a snuff film and the director of one are not as different as you would like to believe. That is what Manhunt is actually saying. And it doesn't stop there. On PlayStation 2 and Xbox, if you plugged in a compatible USB headset, Starkweather's voice stopped coming out of your television. It came directly into your ear through the headset microphone. He whispered to you, personally, and the microphone was always active. If you gasped, coughed, breathed too loudly, or swore when a hunter surprised you, the AI could hear it. The hunters would stop, turn around, come for you. Rockstar blurred the line between cash and the player so completely that there was almost nothing left separating them. Players who experienced this reported something beyond normal discomfort. It wasn't fear of a monster or surprise from a jump scare. It was the deeply unsettling feeling of being watched, of being used, of not being entirely in control of your own experience. The game made many people turn it off, not because it was too scary, but because it made them feel genuinely sick about their own willingness to keep playing. Even the people who built it felt it. Jeff Williams, a former web producer at Rockstar, wrote in a since-deleted blog post that the game caused what he described as almost a mutiny at the company. His exact words, "Manhunt made us all feel icky. It was all about the violence, and it was realistic violence. We all knew there was no way we could explain away that game. There was no way to rationalize it. We were crossing a line. A game that disturbed the people who made it. That should tell you something." When Manhunt launched in November 2003, the reaction from politicians and media watchdogs was immediate and extreme. The white, yellow, red reticle system became the central target. Critics argued it wasn't just depicting violence, it was actively training players to be more sadistic, rewarding patience and brutality over speed and efficiency. The phrase "murder simulator" appeared in editorial after editorial. The game was formally banned in Australia, Germany, New Zealand, South Korea, and Malaysia. Then in July 2004, something happened that changed everything. A 14-year-old named Stefan Pekira was lured to a park in Leicester, England, by his 17-year-old friend, Warren LeBlanc. LeBlanc attacked him with a hammer and a knife and killed him. Stefan's parents publicly blamed Manhunt, claiming LeBlanc was obsessed with the game. British tabloids ran with it immediately. The coverage was enormous. The story became known as the Manhunt murder. Retailers including Game and Dixon's voluntarily pulled Manhunt from their shelves across the UK. But the actual police investigation told a completely different story. The motive was a drug debt, and Manhunt was found in Stefan Pekira's bedroom. The victims, not the killers. LeBlanc didn't even own the game. The police officially and clearly stated that Manhunt played no part in the murder. It didn't matter. The media damage was already done. Manhunt was permanently cemented in the public consciousness as a dangerous and corrupting piece of media regardless of what the investigation concluded. Rockstar's parent company, Take-Two, released a statement pointing out that the judge, the prosecution, the defense, and the Leicester police had all confirmed Manhunt had no connection to the case. It made almost no difference to public perception. Manhunt was not a commercial hit. It sold 75,000 copies in its first month in the United States, a fraction of what GTA titles were doing at the same time. Rockstar never made another game like it. Manhunt 2 came out in 2007, was initially given an adults-only rating that made it essentially unbanned from retail shelves, had to be censored to release, and received a much weaker response. There has been no Manhunt 3. There likely never will be. But here is what Manhunt actually accomplished. It asked a question that nobody in the gaming industry was willing to ask in 2003, and most still avoid today. When you consume violent entertainment, when you choose to keep watching, keep playing, keep progressing through something that makes you uncomfortable, what does that choice say about you? Manhunt didn't answer that question. It wasn't supposed to. It just made sure you couldn't stop thinking about it. 23 years later, it is still one of the most psychologically disturbing games ever made. Not because of the chainsaw, not because of the plastic bag, but because of that mirror. You thought you were hunting in Carcer City. Starkweather thought he was directing a film, and Rockstar was watching both of you the entire time.